I was 60 years old when my nephew erased my name from the company I built with my own 2 hands. 30 years. 30 years of sawdust under my fingernails, of balancing books at midnight, of knowing every worker's name and their children's birthdays. And in one morning, it was gone. The sign came down at sunset. Elliott and Sons Timber, my husband's dream, my life's work. By morning, it read Scottwood Group in cold steel letters. I stood in the parking lot, watching them bolted into place, and I felt something inside me break. Not my heart. That had already cracked when my David died 5 years ago. No, this was different. This was my dignity, my legacy, my name. But that was just the beginning of my plan. The morning it happened, I'd brought blueberry muffins to the office. I always baked on Sundays. It was my ritual. David used to say my muffins could broker peace treaties. I'd laugh and tell him they were just flour and butter, nothing special. But he knew. It was never about the muffins. It was about showing up, about caring. I walked into the boardroom at 9 sharp, bakery box in hand, expecting our quarterly review. Instead, I found 6 strangers in expensive suits. Mary. Scott stood at the head of the table. My nephew. The boy I'd taught to drive. The young man I'd given a job to when nobody else would hire him fresh out of business school. Please, sit down. I set the muffins on the table. Nobody reached for one. What's going on? Scott slid a folder across the polished wood. His face was blank, professional, like I was a stranger. The board has voted to restructure leadership. We're moving in a new direction. Digital integration, automated systems, market expansion. It requires a different kind of vision. I opened the folder. Legal papers, dense paragraphs I couldn't quite focus on. What are you saying, Scott? He straightened his tie. I'd given him that tie for Christmas. We're asking you to step down as co-owner and operator. Effective immediately. You'll retain a small advisory share, but no operational authority. The room went silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. You're firing me. My voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. We're transitioning the company into the 21st century, Aunt Mary. I'm sorry, but analog sentiment can't compete in today's market. I looked around the table. Not one familiar face. Not one person who'd been there when we started with 3 employees and a dream. Where's Bill? Where's Tom Chen? They're on the board. They've been bought out. These are our new investors. I felt my hands start to shake. I gripped the folder to steady them. This company has my husband's name on it. My family's name. Had. Scott's voice was gentle, almost kind. That made it worse. The rebranding launches tonight. It's already decided, Aunt Mary. I thought you'd want to hear it from me first. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, this story is for you. I stood up. My legs felt like water, but I stood. I see. There's a severance package outlined. I don't want your money, Scott. I walked out, left the muffins on the table, left my coffee mug that said, World's Best Boss, sitting by the window where I'd placed it 1,000 mornings. I left my name on that building. And I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. When I got home, I sat in my kitchen for 3 hours. Just sat there, watching the light change through the curtains, watching the shadows grow long. My little house had never felt so empty. David's chair sat in the corner, his reading glasses still on the side table. I hadn't moved them in 5 years, couldn't bring myself to. They took it, David, I whispered to the empty room. They took everything we built. The silence pressed down on me like a weight. I thought about calling someone, my sister in Phoenix, my friend Ruth. But what would I say? That I'd been a fool? That I'd trusted family and got pushed aside like yesterday's newspaper? Instead, I walked to the spare bedroom, the one I used for storage now. In the corner, under a pile of old blankets, sat my mother's trunk. I hadn't opened it in years, couldn't face it after she passed. But now, I knelt down and unlatched the brass clasps. The smell hit me first. Cedar and lavender. Mom's smell. Inside was her sewing box, her needles and threads, and underneath, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, was the quilt, my mother's patchwork quilt. I lifted it out, and something shifted inside my chest. The quilt was made of hundreds of fabric squares, each one carefully stitched together. But it wasn't just any quilt. Each square had a name embroidered on it in my mother's perfect script. James Miller, 1982. Susan Kowalski, 1984. Tom Chen, 1985. Mary Elliott, 1985. The first employees. The original crew who built Elliott Timber from nothing. The people who believed in us when we were just two dreamers with a sawmill and hope. I ran my fingers over the stitches. Every name was someone's story, someone's trust, someone's faith in us. And there, in the center, was my name, Mary Elliott. Not stepped down, not restructured out. Mary Elliott, builder, leader, human being. I sat on the floor of that spare room, holding my mother's quilt, and I cried for the first time since the boardroom. But somewhere in those tears, something else started growing. Not just grief, anger. The first week after they took the company, I barely left the house. I'd wake up at 5:30 out of habit. My body still thought I had somewhere to be. Then I'd remember, and the weight would settle back over me like fog. I tried to keep busy, cleaned closets that didn't need cleaning, reorganized the pantry 3 times, but nothing filled the space where my purpose used to be. Ruth called every day. "Mary, you need to get out. Come to book club. Come to lunch." "I'm fine, Ruth." "You're not fine. You're disappearing." She wasn't wrong. I'd stopped checking the mail, stopped watching the news. The world felt very small and very far away. But I couldn't stop thinking about that quilt. Every evening I'd spread it across my bed and study the names. Tom Chen, who started as a lumber grader and became our floor manager. Susan Kowalski, who ran payroll and never once made a mistake in 18 years. James Miller, who lost 2 fingers in a saw accident and still came back to work because he said we were family. Family. I picked up the phone and called Tom. "Mary?" His voice was warm, surprised. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better, Tom. I heard you left the board." A long pause. "Yeah. Scott made me an offer to buy out my shares. It was generous. I'm sorry, Mary. I didn't know what he was planning." "I'm not angry, Tom. I just want to understand. What's he doing with the company?" Another pause, longer this time. "Automation. He brought in some tech firm to install computerized cutting systems. Laid off 20 guys last week, the old-timers mostly, said they couldn't adapt." My hand tightened on the phone. 20 people? "More coming, from what I hear. He's bringing in contractors, cheaper labor, non-union." I closed my eyes. "Thanks for telling me, Tom. Mary, are you okay?" "I will be." I hung up and sat in the kitchen as the sun went down. 20 families, 20 people who'd worked for us, trusted us, believed we'd take care of them. Gone. If you've ever watched something you built turn into something you don't recognize, you know this feeling. Like watching a stranger wear your face. That night, I couldn't sleep. I got up at 2 in the morning and made coffee, strong and black, the way David used to make it when we had early shipments. I spread the quilt across the kitchen table and just looked at it. Every stitch told a story. My mother had made this over 5 years, adding names as the company grew. She'd done it as a surprise for our 10th anniversary, said it was a reminder that business isn't just about wood and money, it's about people. Business is stitched together by trust, she'd told me. You break that thread, the whole thing unravels. I traced my finger over the embroidered names, and that's when it hit me. Scott could take the sign. He could take the building and the machines and the contracts, but he couldn't take this. He couldn't take the record of who we were, what we'd built, the people who made it real. I pulled out my mother's sewing box and opened it. Inside were spools of thread in every color, needles of different sizes, and a small leather notebook. My mother's pattern book. I flipped through the pages. Sketches of quilt designs, notes about fabric types, little observations written in her careful handwriting. On the last page, she'd written, "A quilt is a memory you can hold. Make sure yours tells the truth." I sat there for a long time, that notebook in my hands. Then I got up, turned on all the lights in the house, and started to make a list. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in a week. I got dressed. Really dressed. Not sweatpants and one of David's old shirts. I put on slacks and a blouse and the silver earrings my mother gave me on my wedding day. Then I drove to the library. The town library had been my refuge when I first moved here 40 years ago. Small, quiet, full of stories. Mrs. Brennan still ran the front desk, though she had to be pushing 80 now. "Mary Elliott," she smiled when she saw me. "Haven't seen you in months. How are you, dear?" "I'm researching, Helen. I need to look at old newspapers, local business records, employment histories if you have them." Her smile faded slightly. "This about the company? Small towns? Everyone knows everything. It's about setting things right." She nodded slowly and led me to the back room where they kept the archives. For 3 days, I lived in that library. I pulled every article about Elliott Timber from the past 30 years, every interview, every photograph. I made copies of business licenses, incorporation papers, partnership agreements, and I found something interesting. When David and I started the company, we'd signed a community benefit agreement. A promise that we'd maintain local employment, pay fair wages, and contribute to town infrastructure. That agreement was still active, still legally binding. Scott's layoffs violated it. I made careful notes, documented everything, names, dates, numbers. Then I started making phone calls. Tom Chen met me at the diner on Thursday. He looked older than I remembered, grayer, tired. "Mary." He slid into the booth across from me. "What's this about?" I pushed a folder across the table. "I need to know exactly what Scott's doing, who he's hiring, who he's firing, what the working conditions are like now." Tom opened the folder. His eyes widened as he read. "This is the community agreement. I forgot this even existed." So did Scott, apparently. "He's in violation. But I need proof. I need documentation." Tom looked at me for a long moment. "You're going after him." "I'm protecting what David and I built." "There's a difference." He smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was real. "I know 3 guys who still work there. They've been documenting everything. Unpaid overtime, safety violations, wage cuts. They were scared to come forward." "Not anymore," I said. "Tell them I'm building a case. And tell them they won't be alone." Over the next 2 weeks, I met with 15 former employees. Each one had a story. Each one had been hurt by Scott's changes. Miguel Ramirez worked there for 12 years, got laid off 2 weeks before his daughter's surgery. No severance, no explanation. Patricia Washington was forced to take a pay cut or quit. She had 3 kids and couldn't afford to walk away. James Miller, the one who'd lost his fingers all those years ago, had been fired for inability to operate new equipment. He was 67 years old. I listened to every story, took notes, made copies of pay stubs and termination letters, and I felt my anger harden into something else: purpose. If you've ever felt powerless, you know how precious it is when you finally find a way to fight back. At night, I worked on the quilt. Not my mother's quilt. A new one. I bought fabric from the craft store. Simple cotton in earth tones, brown and green and deep blue, colors of the forest where we'd harvested our first timber. And I started stitching names, not just the original employees, all of them. Everyone who'd ever worked for Elliott Timber, everyone Scott had pushed aside. I embroidered each name carefully, the way my mother taught me. Every stitch even, every letter clear. It took hours. My fingers ached, my eyes blurred, but I kept going. Because this wasn't just about revenge, this was about remembrance. This was about saying, you existed, you mattered, you won't be forgotten. By the end of the month, I had a quilt 6 feet wide and 8 feet long, hundreds of names, decades of trust stitched into fabric. I'd also filed 3 formal complaints with the State Labor Board, contacted an employment attorney, and sent a detailed packet to the local newspaper. And I'd registered for the County Arts Festival. Ruth thought I was crazy. "You're going to display a quilt? Mary, you should be suing him, not sewing." "I'm doing both," I said calmly. "Justice takes time. But art moves people." She stared at me. "What happened to you? A month ago you could barely leave the house." I looked down at my hands, calloused from carpentry, now covered in tiny needle pricks. "I remembered who I am," I said, "and I decided I'm not going quietly." The County Arts Festival was held in the town square every year. Local artists set up booths selling pottery, paintings, handmade jewelry. There was always a small crowd, families, retirees, tourists passing through. I'd never exhibited before, never thought of myself as an artist. But when I hung my quilt on the display frame, I realized it was the most honest thing I'd ever made. The festival organizer, a young woman named Stephanie, came by to check my setup. "Oh, wow," she said, stepping closer. "What is this?" "It's a record," I said simply, "of people who built something together." She leaned in, reading the names. "These are all real people?" "Every single one." She was quiet for a moment, then looked at me. "What's the title?" I'd thought about that for days, finally settled on the truth. "Made by the hands they tried to erase." She blinked. "That's powerful. It's honest." The first day of the festival was quiet. People walked by, glanced at the quilt, kept moving. A few stopped to ask questions. I told them the short version, a company built by a community, then dismantled by greed. But on the second day, something changed. Tom Chen showed up, and he brought people. Miguel Ramirez, Patricia Washington, James Miller. Other former employees, some I hadn't seen in years. They stood in front of the quilt, searching for their names. "There!" Patricia pointed, her voice breaking. "That's me." "Right there." Miguel crossed himself. "I thought nobody remembered." "I remember," I said quietly. "I remember all of you." Word spread fast in a small town. By the afternoon there was a crowd, not just former employees, their families, friends, people who'd heard the stories. And then the newspaper showed up. The reporter was a young man named Kevin Tang. He'd been at the Gazette for 2 years, mostly covering city council meetings and high school sports. But when he saw the quilt, something shifted in his face. "Can I ask you some questions, Miss Elliott?" "Of course." He pulled out a notebook. "This quilt, it's a memorial?" "It's a witness," I said. "These are the people who built Elliott Timber, people who were promised fairness and dignity, people who've been thrown aside like they never mattered." He wrote quickly. "You're talking about the recent layoffs at Scottwood Group?" "I'm talking about broken promises, violated agreements, a community that was betrayed." I handed him a folder, the same one I'd given to the labor board. "This is documentation of every violation, unpaid wages, safety shortcuts, breaches of the community benefit agreement that's supposed to protect local workers." His eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. "This is substantial. Have you gone to the authorities, the labor board, an employment attorney, and now you?" "I want people to know what happened, not the corporate version, the truth." He looked at me for a long moment. "Why a quilt? Why not just come forward with this information?" I turned back to the display. Sunlight caught the fabric, making the stitches glow. "Because data is cold," I said. "Numbers don't have faces." "But this," I gestured to the names, "this is human. Every name is a story. Every stitch is a reminder that these are real people with real lives. You can't dismiss that. You can't make that disappear with a press release." If you've ever tried to make people see the truth when they'd rather look away, you know how hard it is to find the right words. Sometimes you have to show them instead. Kevin kept writing. One more question. What do you want to happen now? I thought about Scott, about the company, about everything that had been taken. I want justice, I said. Not revenge, justice. I want workers protected, I want promises kept, and I want people to remember that you can't build anything lasting without respect for the people who do the building. The article ran on the front page of Sunday's paper. The Quilt That Remembers, Local Business Owner Exposes Labor Violations Through Art. Kevin had done his homework. He'd interviewed former employees, reviewed the documents I'd provided, and reached out to the labor board for comment. They confirmed an investigation was underway. He'd also contacted Scott Wood Group for a statement. Scott's response was brief. We're committed to modernization and efficiency. All employment decisions have been made in accordance with the law, but the article included photos of the quilt, close-ups of names, quotes from workers who'd been laid off. It was impossible to ignore. By Monday, the story had been picked up by the regional news. By Wednesday, state employment officials were paying a visit to Scott Wood Group, and by Friday, I got a phone call. Mary. It was Scott. His voice was tight. We need to talk. I don't think we do, I said calmly. You're destroying everything I've built. No, I said. I'm revealing what you destroyed. There's a difference. He was silent for a long moment. What do you want? I want you to make things right. Reinstate the workers you fired without cause. Pay the wages you owe. Honor the agreements your uncle signed. And if I don't, then the investigation continues. And the story keeps growing. Your choice, Scott. He hung up without another word. The investigation took 3 months. During that time, I kept the quilt on display at a local community center. People came to see it, to find their names or the names of family members, to tell their stories. It became something bigger than I'd imagined, not just a piece of art, a monument, a rallying point. The labor board discovered what I already knew. Scott had violated multiple employment laws, unpaid overtime, improper terminations, safety violations that put workers at risk. The fines were substantial, but it was the community benefit agreement that really hurt him. That agreement gave the town legal standing to sue for breach of contract. The town council, suddenly aware of how much money and goodwill Elliott Timber had brought to the community over the years, voted to pursue action. Scott tried to fight it, hired expensive lawyers, claimed the agreement was outdated and unenforceable, but the evidence was overwhelming, and the public pressure was relentless. Local businesses started pulling contracts. Suppliers who'd worked with us for decades refused to deal with Scott Wood Group. The community closed ranks. Small towns, everyone knows everything, and they remember. 6 months after the festival, Scott called me again. I'm selling, he said. No preamble, no pretense. Selling what? The company. I've got a buyer lined up, a regional cooperative. They want to restore the original name, bring back some of the old employees. They asked if you'd be willing to consult. I sat down slowly. Why are you telling me this? He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, smaller. Because you were right. I thought I was building something modern and efficient, but I built something hollow, something that couldn't stand on its own. Scott, I'm sorry, Aunt Mary. I'm sorry I erased your name. I'm sorry I forgot what really mattered. I closed my eyes, felt the anger I'd carried for months start to loosen. Thank you for saying that. Will you help them? The new owners? I'll think about it. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. Ruth was right. I had changed. I wasn't the same woman who'd sat in that boardroom feeling powerless and small. I'd found my voice again, my strength. Not because I'd destroyed Scott, but because I'd stood up for something bigger than my own hurt. If you've ever had to choose between bitterness and purpose, you know how hard that choice can be. But purpose heals. Bitterness just spreads. The sale went through in early fall. The cooperative, made up of former employees and local investors, bought Scott Wood Group for a fraction of what Scott had valued it at. The first thing they did was change the sign back. Elliott Timber. The second thing they did was offer me a position as senior advisor. No operational authority if I didn't want it. Just guidance, mentorship, a voice. I accepted. But I didn't go back to the way things were. Instead, I opened something new. Mary Elliott Workshop opened on a crisp October morning. It was a small storefront on Main Street, next to the bakery and across from the library. The space had been a furniture store once, empty for years. Now it was filled with fabric, sewing machines, and people. The workshop was simple. I taught quilting to anyone who wanted to learn. Retirees looking for community, young mothers needing an outlet, immigrants new to town, looking for a way to connect. We made quilts, but more than that, we made stories. Every quilt we created told someone's truth, family histories, cultural traditions, personal journeys. We sold some, displayed others, donated many to shelters and nursing homes. The money we made went to a scholarship fund for local students pursuing trades, carpentry, electrical work, plumbing, the skills that built communities. I named it the David Elliott Memorial Fund. On the wall of the workshop, I hung my mother's quilt, the original one, with all those names from the early days. Next to it, I hung the one I'd made, the one from the festival, and I started a third. This one was different. It had names, yes, but it also had dates, milestones, moments of healing. Tom Chen, rehired, 2025. Patricia Washington, promoted, 2025. Miguel Ramirez, full benefits, 2025. Every good thing that came from the struggle, every small victory, every step toward making things right, because that's what justice really is, not just punishment, restoration. Ruth visited me on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The workshop was empty except for us. Light streamed through the windows, catching dust motes in golden beams. She looked at the quilts on the wall, then back at me. "You did it," she said softly. "You got your name back." I thought about that, about the sign on Elliott Timber, about my name in the newspaper, about the workshop with my name on the door. "No," I said. I realized something better. My name was never really gone. It was in every person I helped, every worker I stood beside, every meal I shared, every promise I kept. I touched the quilt with my mother's stitching. Scott could take the sign. But he couldn't take this. He couldn't erase what was stitched into people's hearts. Ruth smiled. "Your mother would be proud." "I hope so." We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the light change. Then Ruth said, "So what's next?" "You've won. You've rebuilt. What else is there?" I looked around the workshop, at the tables where people would gather tomorrow, at the fabric waiting to become stories, at the windows facing a street I'd walked for 40 years. "I keep going," I said. "I keep showing people that you can lose everything and still find purpose. That betrayal doesn't get the last word. That dignity isn't something someone else can give you or take away. It's something you carry in yourself." "Like thread," Ruth said. "Exactly like thread." A few weeks later, I got a letter. It was from Scott. A real letter, handwritten on good paper. "Dear Aunt Mary, I've moved out of state. Starting over. I thought I should tell you, not for forgiveness, but for honesty. I've been thinking about what you said, about what really matters, about building something that lasts. I was wrong, about everything. I thought success meant growth, profit, modernization. I forgot it meant people, trust, integrity. You taught me that, the hard way. I know I can't undo what I did, but I'm trying to be better, to build something real this time. Thank you for not giving up on what's right, even when I gave up on it. Scott." I folded the letter carefully and put it in my mother's trunk, not because I wanted to keep it, but because it was part of the story now, part of the pattern. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about releasing the weight so you can move forward. On the 1-year anniversary of the festival, the town held a ceremony. They unveiled a permanent display in the community center. My quilt, protected behind glass, with a plaque explaining its history. Made by the hands they tried to erase, a testament to labor, dignity, and justice. They asked me to speak. I stood in front of a room full of people, workers, families, town officials, and I felt David's presence beside me. My mother's. Everyone who'd believed in building something good. I made this quilt because I was angry, I said, because I felt powerless, because someone took something that mattered to me and threw it away. I paused, looking at the faces in the crowd. But it became something bigger. It became a reminder that our value doesn't come from titles or signs or paychecks. It comes from the way we treat each other, the promises we keep, the people we lift up. I gestured to the quilt. Every name here is a person who showed up, who worked hard, who believed in something bigger than themselves. They're the real story. Not me, not the company. Them. I took a breath. We live in a world that tries to tell us we're disposable, that we can be replaced, erased, forgotten. But we're not. Every one of us leaves a mark. Every one of us stitches something into the world that can't be undone. I looked at the quilt one more time. This is my reminder. And I hope it's yours too. You matter. Your work matters. Your story matters. The room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then everyone. But I wasn't thinking about applause. I was thinking about a spare bedroom where I'd sat on the floor, crying and broken, and how far I'd come since then. Not because I'd won, but because I'd refused to disappear. That evening, I went home and sat in David's chair. The house was quiet, peaceful. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the fight, the healing, and I thought about what it all meant. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, persistent as a needle pulling thread. Sometimes it's just refusing to let them tell you you're worth nothing. Sometimes it's stitching your name into the world one careful thread at a time until no one can pretend you were never there. I looked at the wall where I'd hung a small quilt. Just a simple design. My mother's name, my name, and space for more. For grandchildren I might never have. For people I might never meet. For anyone who needed a reminder that they mattered. I picked up my needle and thread, and I started stitching. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Not because everything was perfect. It wasn't. There were still hard days, still moments of doubt. But I'd learned something important. Your worth isn't measured by what people take from you. It's measured by what you refuse to let them erase. And my name, my real name, the one written in kindness and integrity and stubborn hope, was stitched too deeply into this world to ever disappear.